Hi, Classtime Academy. Welcome to this week's task. I'm extremely happy to have Scott Houston with us today. My name is Valentin from Classtime. And as you know, we have several tasks in the Classtime Academy, and the focus of this academy is effective assessments. And today's special topic is going to be math assessments for strategic thinking. And I couldn't have asked for anyone better to explain to us how to make math assessments more effective. Scott has been on several webinars with us already. He's a master in using Classtime, creates a lot of amazing question sets that we'll be talking about and also showing to you, and that are actually also available to you in the public library. And together today, we'll be talking about the elements that really make up a great math assessment, the different science behind it, the strategic thinking that you can consider when creating your math assessments. And the goal is that you can then effectively make better assessments for your students with a focus on math, right? So without further ado, Scott, could you please shortly introduce yourself, give our audience a bit of a background, an idea of what you've been doing so far, and how you can help us today better understand how to make math assessments more effective.
Absolutely. So I have been working as an educational consultant for about the last 20 years in the fields of both math, science, language arts. And one of the things that we've been looking at is how high stakes testing has changed over the last 10 years. And for a lot of kids, the data from when the old test versus the new tests, the data dropped significantly. And it had a lot to do with the way that the test makers were asking the questions in the new assessments. And so people were a little, they didn't know exactly how to tackle this. And so one of the things that I've been looking into is the types of questions that have been being asked, the types of thinking that are involved in those questions, and then the types of tech that have been involved in those questions. And it's a blending of those three things that makes students have difficulty with those questions. And it's because they're not trained on it. Most of them know the basics of the math. When you check on that, they know it. But when you start incorporating the tech and the strategic thinking into the math, the kids are struggling. They just haven't had enough exposure. The teacher hasn't focused on it explicitly. So we want to be able to help teachers do that. And so I go from different districts and I do trainings on strategic thinking, on the tech, to help teachers not only build better assessments, but to create activities in the classroom that build this type of thinking. Mm-hmm. And Classtime has been a perfect outlet for the combination of tech and strategic thinking in terms of building the questions. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the introduction. Scott, so, let's take a step back and just in your personal opinion and observation, what makes a math assessment effective?
Well, the first thing you have to look for is, as the teacher, what is it that you really, truly want to know? Most of the times we just take the test from the textbook, or we take an online test that's just there, and we just assume they knew what they were doing, and we give that. But we don't necessarily break it down into, is it getting students ready for high stakes testing? Is it really testing what we want to know? And these are the questions teachers need to ask themselves. So since I've been looking specifically at strategic thinking and about high stakes testing, then what I want to be able to do is say, I want my question set to explicitly go after that. Mm-hmm. So let me give a prime example. The first 4 questions of a question set, let's say, can be basically on the targeted standard or the targeted content. Like, I just want to know whether or not you can divide, period. Mm-hmm. Then I will ask you basic questions on that. If you get those 4 questions right, I know you have the basics. But then I'll start asking DOK 1 questions, right? Depth of knowledge 1. But I will throw in some strategic thinking into it and then see if the kids still perform at a high level. Then I'll throw in some DOK 2 questions and then some DOK 3 questions. And I'll see if the kids perform at a high level all the way from question 1 to 10, or to see if they start falling off around question 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. If they start falling off, then I know it's not a content problem. I know it's a type of question problem. It could be tech, it could be strategic thinking, but there's something very explicitly there that lets teachers know, hey, they know the basics, but we need to get them this other type of higher level thinking in order for them to succeed on a high stakes test. So if your goal is for kids to do better on a high stakes test, then you want to build it to find out exactly where the kids are having their difficulties.
Mm-hmm. Great. That's fantastic to know, Scott. And we'll quickly take a look at the work you've done so far, because I'd like to show also our audience how to exactly think about it, especially the elements of strategic thinking and how it looks like when you're actually doing what you just described, right? But just for our audience to know. So here we go. We're here in our library now, and as you might know, we have our public library where you can find, various question sets for free. And so one thing I would recommend and encourage you to search for is Scott Houston. So just enter his name as the author. His content will appear, and then maybe math, and then you can also add strategic thinking, for example. Oh, here we go. And you'll see different question sets where you will see where Scott applied the elements he had just been talking about. So I already added this one, third grade strategic thinking one. Here we go, third grade strategic thinking. And we have the different question types here, right? We have different types of strategic thinking. And so you will find this content for free, and you can use it as a blueprint inspiration to really understand what Scott's going to be talking about right now. But so in this sense, Scott, maybe I can give over to your screen, right, and you can tell us a bit more about strategic thinking and what that really means.
Okay. So in this particular slide that you're seeing in front of you, this is pretty much for the elementary group. These are the ones that show up most for elementary. Now, they do show up quite a bit for secondary, but we have found that the elementary school kids are having the most difficulty with the strategic thinking types. And these just are a sample of the types of thinking or the types of questions that they're asking. So for example, in something like visual analysis, this is almost always a chart, a graph, a table that the kids could not answer the question unless they have the ability to analyze that particular visual. This shows up a lot. And a lot of times, books don't necessarily have those visuals in there for kids to analyze and pick apart. So each of these represents a different kind of thing they do in high stakes testing. Usually when I do trainings on this, we go through each one. I show different kinds of question types, and I let teachers try and analyze what type of thinking the question's asking them for. And then we'll even look at data on those questions from students they may have had or from students from other schools. And we'll see which kinds of questions we're giving the kids the most problems. Because then that way we can target what types of strategic thinking we want to go after. So I'm not going to get into like every single type of thinking right now. I just want to talk about how the question design would fit with this. So, and we may refer back to this a little bit. So this isn't all. These are the ones that show up a little bit more on the secondary side. So interpreting data, finding and correcting errors, know and apply a formula. Those show up a little bit more in the secondary, but we will find them in elementary as well. But these are the ones that you will see primarily in the elementary levels over and over again. So these were the ones we would be focused on.
Mm-hmm. And Scott, so these are very different types of strategic thinking, and I thank you for elaborating on them a bit. What does that mean in terms of question types, right? Do you need different question types to test for these types of strategic thinking, or can you do everything with multiple choice? How does that translate into actually preparing a question set as a teacher who wants to improve the effectiveness of their assessments?
Excellent question. The first thing you want to be looking for is, I know the types of questions that kids struggle with are like the modeling questions, where they have to manipulate a visual. Like we have to like put on a graph, or we have to click on a line plot, right? And so the hotspot allows me to do a lot of that on Classtime. So I will be looking for, if we're creating a line plot, I might have the multiple right answer hotspot where they have to put in the different X's or spots. So I would want that for something like visual analysis or modeling, right? If I'm looking for something like comparing, I might use the sorter, put things in order from least to greatest, so that they could do something like that. And so the sorter piece works wonderfully for that. So I'm going to be putting those into play. The situational analysis requires usually more than one right answer. Like, given this situation, what is true about it? Or which of the following answers fit what the question's asking for? If that's the case, the checkbox question
Absolutely.
is fabulous for that. So it really just depends where my focus is, what kinds of questions I want to ask. But that's the great thing about Classtime, is that for almost any type of strategic thinking, I have got a tech item to choose from that will help me best ask that question. And so that's why I've chosen Classtime as my formatting place to do most of my test writing questions, because and then it'll grade it for me too, which now I could spend my time analyzing the data, which then affects the way I would teach the information. And I'd rather do that than just, grading by answer, and by having the different kinds of tech, I'm also just immediately seeing the difference between the typical questions and then the higher level thinking questions.
So that's fantastic. So can we maybe look into it, and can you show us, how does that look? What does that mean specifically, right? Like the basic thinking questions, and then the higher strategic thinking types of questions. Can you show our community, how do you go about creating a question set like that? What's the structure, and what's some advice and examples that you can share with our audience?
Absolutely. So I'm going to go with ones that I'm currently building, just to show you how my thought process is, as opposed to one that's already finished. So let me go ahead and jump into that real quick. All right. So I've got my strategic thinking folder. We'll take a look at third grade, and we'll look at operations and algebraic thinking, and we'll look at this two-step word problems. Okay. So the first thing we would look for in a two-step word problem, and these are all DOK2 because just word problems in and of themselves lend them to this. And so the first four questions are always going to just be straight multiple choice. And it's like, hey, can you find the solution to this answer, right? So in this particular case, it's 6 times 2 times 3. The answer is 36. Very basic. It's the exact kind of thing you would get in any textbook. So the first four questions target that. 2 multiple choice, which are the most common type of questions still on most high stakes testing, and then 2 free text, which is the second most popular type of question in high stakes testing. So the first 4 questions are always basic and multiple choice and free text. Then we get to questions 6 and 7. Now, these are almost always starting to throw in an extra type of thinking. So in this particular case, we have put in a highlight text. The type of thinking is finding errors on top of recognizing operations. Because with recognizing operations, that is always going to happen in word problems. Like you have to be able to tell if it's add, subtract, multiply, divide. Kids have to be able to do that just under this standard umbrella. But then we would throw in a finding errors. So can kids figure out where the mistake was made? And highlight text works fabulous for that.
So maybe we can take one step back and take a very close look at that again. So how did you do this, the highlight text one?
So how did I build it?
Yeah, so if you can open up the editor again, please.
Sure, absolutely.
So basically you add your question in the top, right? Trying to solve the problem, it makes an error, click on the first step where it makes an error. Then you have a little description with an image to add some, I guess, fun to it. And then you pick the highlight text question type, where you then created 4 sentences. Every sentence, every step basically is clickable. And step 3, which has a little asterisk symbol, is the correct answer, right?
Exactly.
And so students would then have to read through every step and then know to click on step 3 as the correct answer, where the error was made. Is that correct, right?
That is exactly right, yes.
Got
and the
it.
way I like to design it is the step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. So it's very clear for younger kids to see how that's delineated. If I just kind of wrote it in a paragraph form, it becomes a lot harder for them to see. And in 3rd grade, I really want the training to be specific on strategic thinking. Like, they can look at step 1 and say to themselves, is that correct? Yes or no. Step 2, is that correct? Yes or no. So when they go through it, it's a lot easier for them to recognize. And then as they get older, we may put it more in paragraph form, where kids would have to choose which sentence within the paragraph is incorrect, which is a little bit tougher of a skill because it's more in context.
Got it. Great. Thank you so much for elaborating on that.
Of course. And so with each question, we target a different kind of strategic thinking. So like in question 8, we had mentioned the idea of situational analysis. So which 2 of these word problems target this particular equation, right? And so then the students have to look through each one, and they would choose 2 of these, and it's situational analysis because which of these particular ones match this given situation. We find that these types of questions are bar none the most difficult for students to get right. They look at this, they think it's a multiple choice question, and then they just choose one answer. They choose the first one they see, and they don't go through each one step by step and do like a yes/no thought process, which is what they definitely need to be doing in situational analysis questions. But so many kids have been trained in multiple choice, they just find the right answer, they move on. We see this again and again and again, and kids need to be trained how to do these better. So in this particular case, we do a checkbox. Sometimes we will say things like, instead of which 2, we would just say which of these word problems will be solved by using the equation below. And then we would add on select all that apply. It just depends how I want to go after it. Select all that apply tend to be harder than which 2, because 2 gives them a specific goal. It just, as a teacher, which way do you want to go about it? And in this particular case, since I'm training 3rd graders, I'm starting them with the easier of the thought process, which is which 2.
Got it. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So that's just another advice, right? If you have younger students, you can be explicit about it. And as students get more used to this type of strategic thinking and thinking about the type of tech type question, right, from multiple choice to checkboxes, make it harder by then also changing the way you phrase the question.
Yes. So that gives us just a lot of things. And now the last 2 questions tend to be my DOK3 questions. And the DOK3 questions require an explanation piece. And another one of the questions that turns out to be very difficult for kids is the multiple choice explanation. The multiple choice explanation basically says like, this is what I believe the answer is, and here's my reason why. Most of the time, the kids will just put in the correct answer, and they can't explain how they got it, why they got it, and they certainly can't do it when it's given to them in the multiple choice format. They get lost in the reading of the explanation. We see this again and again. Even though the kids knew the content, they struggle here. So we need to give them explicit practice that does that. So this does work well with a multiple choice setting, because this is usually how that question is asked on high stakes testing. So, and in this particular case, you always give explanations that sound relatively reasonable, but there's always some kind of error or mistake in those explanations, and the kids have to pick through each one. And then you also see the term claims down here, and they do claims things where it's like, do you agree with this claim, or do you agree with this statement? And then you explicitly should say, I do agree, I don't agree, I support the claim, I do not support the claim, and then you give the reason why. So you'll see with each of these, I think she made a mistake, I disagree, I agree, yes. It goes directly to this question, do you agree with Perdita? Explain. And they have to target this. And this is a DOK3 because it makes them show their thinking or explain their thinking. So with each of these, it's always the first 8 questions are usually DOK1, DOK2. In this case, the first 9 or first 8 here were DOK2. And that is just because of the nature of this standard. Every time you do a two-step word problem, it's automatically going to be a DOK2.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's more like, hey, multiply, then the first 6 questions are always going to be DOK1. The next 2 will be DOK2. And then the last 2 will be DOK3.
So, sorry to interrupt. For the audience that are not familiar with this, DOK is the depth of knowledge, right? And
Correct.
So maybe, Scott, you could also add, like, so, as the DOK goes up, depth of knowledge, 1, 2, 3, and then eventually 4, how does that connect to the strategic thinking pieces that you also have? Are they connected, or can every strategic thinking piece used for different DOK levels?
No, it does kind of vary. Like there are some that definitely connect to DOK1 better than others. Like if you do a matching activity, essentially a DOK1, right? But if you're doing something where you're doing some comparison, like if you're finding the answers to various equations or expressions, then if you have them put them in order from least to greatest, that comparing brings it up from a 1 to a 2. A lot of times just saying like, 4 plus 9 equals 13. Well, that's just typical DOK1, right? But if I do that 5 times with 5 different problems, and then I ask you to put them in order from least to greatest by doing the comparison piece, I've moved it up into a DOK2 because of the comparison idea, right? Then you get into other things like categorizing. If I want to categorize something as less than 10, greater than 10, more than 10, like along those lines, I'm still living in that DOK2 area that I wasn't before. DOK1 a lot of the time is just the computation, the discrete skill of can I multiply, can I divide, can I find the answer to this pattern? All of those things connect to that. When I get into DOK2, it's finding errors, right? It's categorizing, it's comparing, like all of those kinds of things play with that. Conditional questions where you have to try to find an answer that meets certain conditions. Like, for example, I'm looking for an odd number greater than 20 that is a factor of 3, right? So I have to find a number that fits all 3 of those conditions. That's a DOK2 level, right?
Got it. And so we have different DOK levels in strategic thinking in that question set that you've been working on right now, right?
Yes.
And so you mentioned they get harder or higher in DOK level as the question number progresses. How do you think about how does a teacher decide how many DOK 1, 2, or 3 questions they want to build in, or how many different types of strategic thinking? Is there a recommendation, a guideline, the number of questions, or how do you think about the structure of it? And maybe also in light with connecting it to the analysis of the data you want to do in the end, right? The insights that you get. So how does a teacher think about the structure of the question set?
Great. So what I'm showing you now is how I design each of my question sets that I'm currently working on. And so what this does is it usually breaks down like we have, let me put one because that's the one I'm in the middle of. So let me do this one right here. So this is understanding division as an unknown factor problem. This is like fact families, right? So you see the first 6 questions here are DOK level 1, right? Multiple choice, short answer. The first 4 are always the pattern for that. And these are always just the most basic things. Like this standard itself, it just lends itself to algebraic thinking naturally. There's no way around it. And it's basically like 3 plus blank equals 9, right? It's real basic. The kids figure out the blank. They do that with these first 4. I can say, yes, they have the basics, right? Then the next 2 are still DOK 1s, but now I include one extra either tech issue. So here now I've put in a matching table. It's still DOK 1 because it's matching, and it's still algebraic because it completely fits with the type of question that the standard's asking for, right? Then you'll notice my second one is a multiple correct answer, which is a checkbox question. And this time it throws in the situational analysis piece on top of the algebraic, but it's still just doing the basic computational part. It's just the way the question's asked and the extra content because of the, now you've got to find more than one right answer, makes it a little bit more difficult of a DOK level 1, right? So if kids still have this, then I'm like, okay, the question type didn't throw them off. They still know the basics really well. Great. Now I get to DOK2, and if I start seeing that they're having trouble here with finding errors or conditional thinking, I know I need to target this kind of strategic thinking because I know it's not a content problem now. They did great on the first 6.
Mm-hmm.
So now I know I'm dealing with, they need help on finding errors regardless of content, or they need help with conditional questions regardless of content, right? And then if I go to DOK level 3 and I see they're really tanking this, their ability to explain their thinking is definitely compromised. So this is a place where I know as a teacher, I need to work their ability to explain their thinking. And in this case, multiple choice and short answer, because these are the 2 ways that they check for your explanation of thinking on high stakes testing.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So this is I think interesting to also share with our audience that before you even create questions, you first think about the blueprint, the strategy in terms of DOK levels, the strategic thinking, the structure of, how many questions do you want to ask for different types, that you can do the checks, did they understand the basics, and then, test for different types of strategic thinking as they move along in the assessment. Giving you the insight immediately then when students start answering. You'll basically see it in the session dashboard, right? Like all green when they got the basics, and then it starts getting more red towards higher strategic thinking, which will help you to really see the overall score, but also identify very clearly where do students get stuck and where do you need to refocus on your teaching and making sure that students really can close those gaps in different types of depth of knowledge or strategic thinking that goes with that assessment.
Right. And I would highly recommend that teachers get trained on how to identify these kinds of questions, because most of the time we just kind of follow the book or we follow the computer program or whatever, and we don't necessarily think about the types of questions kids are doing on a basic daily basis. They're almost always doing content. Content wasn't the problem. The high stakes testing in the past, the kids did so much better on the old test than they're doing on the new test. And it's because of this shift. And if we don't help them make this shift, they're going to continuously score lower than they would. And it has nothing to do with their content knowledge, but it has everything to do with the way the question was asked, either tech-wise or strategic thinking-wise. So I think that's really important for teachers to kind of think about.
Yeah, excellent. Well, Scott, is there any other advice you'd like to share with our community? Any final thoughts on, how to make the assessments most effective for themselves?
Yeah, the other thing you may want to be looking at is a lot of the high stakes testing also asks for like performance tasks. Mm-hmm. So if we jump into the library and you type in like performance task, and you'll see different kinds of questions that are here. Now, these don't necessarily target strategic thinking. What these do is they target math storytelling. And the good ones will have different kinds of question types. So here we see a sorter that's involved. We see checkboxes. We see true or false. We see multiple choice. So this was put together in a way that like builds something. So if I click on this one, like there's a garden blueprint, and it's telling the story of the garden. So every single question is following like what's happening in the garden. It focuses on a different standard of math, and it just helps kids to see that math is kind of like universally blended into so many concepts. So that's another thing you can look for here is you could type in performance tasks, find different pieces of it, and then try to put one that fit into your grade level. So you may want to look at a few of these in order to build some of your own.
Fantastic. And thank you so much for also showing how teachers can find your question sets in the public library, such as searching again for Scott Houston in the search bar. They're often or always connected to him as an author, but you can also specifically look for math, strategic thinking, or performance task, as Scott has shown right now. So with that, sorry. Yeah.
And I was going to say too, a lot of it, the strategic thinking is built in without typing in strategic thinking. I just didn't actually like classify it in these beginning question sets. I was targeting more the great different kinds of tech I could use, and I wasn't specifically putting the types of strategic thinking into it the way I'm doing now. So you're not necessarily going to find the word strategic thinking in every single one. You're going to want to like be able to pick it out from these different like performance tasks or from any of the other math that's in there. The focus was more on the tech.
Got it. Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Scott, for all these valuable insights. I learned a lot, and I think it's very interesting how you think about, the science behind it, the strategic thinking, depth of knowledge. It clearly shows you have a blueprint, a plan before you create an assessment, and you can also then very nicely visually see the different stages of where students get stuck as a class or individual students. That really help you as an educator to focus on the right types of challenges that students might be facing. If you have any questions, dear audience, or requests, or would like to get more help, feel free to comment in the comment section in the video, or always reach out to us at support@classtime.com or any of the teammates that you're in touch with, and we'll gladly connect you also to Scott if you have any specific questions for him. In terms of the Academy, please don't forget to complete your session. So we will be sharing a code where you can then join and answer the questions about this task and make sure that you can successfully continue and complete the Classtime Academy. So with that, Scott, I really thank you again for this fantastic insight that you've shared. And I really look forward to hearing from our community what they've learned, how they've used it, hopefully in effective assessments. And I look forward to having you on our video webinars very soon again.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.